Hi, folks. My name's Sam. I'm the Director of Policy and Research. Sumit and I are now going to walk you through some of the findings from our national survey that we conducted in mid-May with 2,000 Canadians. And we did this, as Kareem mentioned, to try to inform what we were going to focus on in the coming year and also get a sense from Canadians of their kind of first reactions to some of the challenges with this technology. So we partnered with Polera Strategic Insights to do this with 2,000 Canadians over the age of 18, and then we did follow-up interviews with 20 of those participants. So as a guideline, a probability sample of this size would yield results accurate within about 2 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. So, and this was sort of mentioned off the top, Canadians are more connected than ever during COVID-19. We asked folks which activities they'd done online in the first 2 months of the pandemic from mid-March to mid-May. And so, fully 87% of Canadians said they had done online banking. 79% said they'd done online messaging or video calls. And you can see sort of the top platforms there. So Facebook Messenger, Zoom, followed by WhatsApp and Skype were the top 4. We did ask about a whole suite of them. And so, things like Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts, WebEx that we're using today were all used by a smaller group of Canadians. But certainly Zoom jumped out as something that even many older Canadians are now using in 30–40% range, which is considerable growth from where we were before. And you can see here some of the interview participants talked about that as well. We also found 77% of people were online shopping during the pandemic. 76% were using social media, and some of the top ones were Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and then Twitter. And 74% were checking news online. And interesting, we asked about online healthcare because that, primary care and mental health care transitioned a lot to telehealth over the pandemic. And so we asked about that. And 19% of Canadians said that they had done some version of online healthcare. And so we asked this just to kind of level set what are some of the challenges, how pressing is it as Canadians have moved online. I should say too, sorry, I meant to mention this. If you have questions as we're going, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll try to address them once we're done the presentation. And you can also use the Q&A function. If you have a question or a comment that you want to verbalize, we can turn your mic on. So just enter that you want to do that in the Q&A function. But if you just have a question that you want us to answer without talking, you can use the chat function. And sorry, I should have said that off the top. Okay. And so I mentioned some of the age differences. We wanted to just highlight a few of them. So you can see, sometimes there's a sense that, that these stats are driven in large part by younger Canadians and that older Canadians are less connected. But, you can see online banking, really consistent use across age groups, online messaging and video calls. Again, some difference by age, but not a lot. But certainly the platforms differ. So you can see, for example, Facebook used somewhat more consistently across age groups, whereas a platform like Instagram has almost comparable participation in younger age demographics, falling to less than 20% of those 60 plus. And then we've mentioned this now a few times. So we found a majority of Canadians report having been the victim of a cyber crime. We'll get into on the next slide what some of those crimes are, but we also tried to really explore some of this in the interviews and got some great examples. So some recent examples, somebody mentioned that they got that web page sent to them that had stats of COVID cases near them in their area. And they were just glancing at it on their phone, clicked on it, and it was a phishing attempt. So an example of cyber criminals using the COVID pandemic as phishing lure. And then somebody told us the story about their online account being hacked, some of their frequent flyer miles being stolen, and basically being referred to the RCMP that the company couldn't do anything. And so we dug into what kinds of crimes people were self-reporting, and I should caution this is self-reporting. And when we did have about 15% of Canadians say they didn't know, even though we tried to define the terms. But some of these are complex, and so just put out there that it is self-reporting. But 31% said they'd unintentionally installed a computer virus or malware. 28% said that they had experienced a data breach that exposed their personal information. 22% said they'd had an online account hacked, which surprised me at a higher rate than I expected. And then 13% had been a victim of phishing, and we define that for folks. And then 8% said they installed or downloaded ransomware in which their personal information was held back for ransom. So, worrying stats, and certainly higher stats than had previously been reported in Canada by other groups gauging this. And so something that we'll watch and continue to monitor. And then Sumit's going to take it from here.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, folks. My name is Sumit Bhatia. I'm the Director of Communications and Knowledge Mobilization at the Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst. And just continuing to share some of the results here. So what you see on the screen is talks a little bit about regulation versus innovation. And one of the tensions with public policy and technology is that you often hear that Canada is a relatively small player and we have to protect our economy and innovation. So we wanted to hear how Canadians felt about that and realized that overwhelmingly that was not their perspective. Over half of the Canadians we surveyed disagree with that sentiment, and those views are consistent across age and gender. So what you see there is that 28% of Canadians strongly disagree with regulating technology companies in the name of protecting individuals' privacy and security. They strongly disagree with that statement. 24% somewhat disagree. 52% of Canadians in general seem to disagree, and only 17% agree with that. Our personal view on that is that this is an opportunity for us to also think about innovation in public policy and think about how we can be innovative in the models that we can develop for data governance and technology governance going forward. Moving on to the next slide, we again wanted to interview Canadians and ask them on a scale of 1 to 10 how much they trusted different institutions to keep their personal data secure. And here are those that ranked 7 to 10. And as Laurie mentioned earlier, clearly our survey reveals that trust in major institutions such as banks, healthcare providers, and governments to keep Canadians' personal data secure is relatively strong. And where we see it start to dwindle a little bit is social media outlets, large corporates like Facebook, where the trust they only hold the trust of 1 in 6 Canadians, or 15%. And I think a lot of it has to do generally with the need for better policy to ensure that the security and privacy of social media users continues to be a prominent discussion in technology policy. And clearly Canadians feel that work needs to continue on an ongoing basis. As we move to the next slide, we wanted to ask Canadians how connected were they, especially with internet-connected devices in their households. We know between 2015 and 2018, the number of IoT devices more than doubled globally, from 3.8 billion devices to 8.3 billion devices. And the forecast is that we're going to reach 21.3 billion IoT devices by 2025. And what you see there is a representation of the different types of devices that Canadians own, with internet-connected televisions holding that largest percentage at 48%, followed by smart watches at 28%, and then smart speakers at 26%. And we know some of the concerns that have been expressed around those devices when it comes to security and privacy. So that is, again, an area of work that we're going to continue to focus on. The next slide talks about IoT and the digital divide. And just to take a quick second, by digital divide, we're referring to inequalities that exist and an uneven distribution in the access to, or the use of, or the impact of digital technologies, and that includes IoT. And as we see here, 68% of Canadians that we surveyed said they own at least one IoT device. 38% said at least two devices, and 20% said three or more. But when we actually look at the devices owned based on income, we see that 51% with income under $50,000 owned at least one device, and 82% with income of $100,000 or more owned one device. And so we can see that disparity. And going back to what Kareem mentioned earlier about one of our core principles, that harms, inequities, and injustices arising from the unequal use of application of technology needs to be confronted, and that again is going to feature largely in our work. Next, smart speakers, something a lot of us are familiar with and a lot of us own. Of the 26% of folks that confirmed that they owned a smart speaker, we saw the Google Nest Hub owning the largest percentage there with 58%, followed by Amazon Echo 37%, and then the Apple HomePad at 7%. We can see people's limitations or hesitation around how they use these technologies at home. 52% say they keep it in the kitchen or living space and away from more private spaces like bedrooms and bathrooms. 26% adjusted the settings to restrict the kinds of information these speakers can access, whereas 24% said they regularly turn it off or unplug it. And I think that continues to tell us a little bit about people's hesitations associated with these devices, because there's a lack of clarity on how they collect data and how that data is utilized. The hesitation and paranoia associated with that is higher. And I think we have to continue to work on figuring out models of transparency when it comes to data and data governance around these devices. Next, we've got home security cameras, such as the Ring doorbell, the Amazon Ring. And we can again see here that Canadians' opinions on these is quite varied. 49% that believe that it is an individual's right to own these devices, whereas we can see 26% are uncomfortable with being captured on them. And there's clearly a hesitation, not just in using them, but also being in places that utilize these devices. And 15% said they're supportive of an outright ban on products that can capture private video of people without their consent. And in fact, when we look at Quebec, survey respondents from Quebec indicated that they're more than twice as likely, almost 29%, to support a ban on these devices as the rest of Canada. And as you'll see from our next slide, some of the comments that we got clearly outline the hesitation associated with these. There's a lack of clarity in how that data is being accessed. There's a lack of clarity in the distance with which they capture data. And there's clearly concerns about privacy that arise from there, even while people feel that they do present some benefits around monitoring their personal space and being able to report those personal spaces. And in fact, the results that we've seen come out of the US clearly highlight that some of those concerns are spread across North America. I will take a second quickly to point out here that the digital divide is again highlighted in such technologies. The pairing of IoT devices with cameras that collect biometric data enables devices to profile people based on an algorithmic threat assessment. And when we actually see a review of Ring's technology, and the Neighbors app found that its algorithm often flagged people of color as being suspicious. So that work really does continue in trying to identify how we also address the digital divide and some of these other concerns around security and privacy. Earlier in the year, we also released a report called The Race to Trace, which really talked about Canada's position on security and privacy of COVID-19 contact tracing apps. And what we found is that a lot of people and their views on the support for organizations that make these tracing apps mandatory varied across different sectors. The appetite for people to be supportive of these apps being mandatory in public services like transit was a lot higher. We saw almost 26% of people, only 26% of people disagree with that, whereas the larger percentage really indicated that they were comfortable with that. But as we see down that list, that changes. When we look at employers utilizing those apps, we see there is a greater percentage of people that disagree with that, marginally greater at 29%. And as we progress through that list, organizations like retail or grocery stores, or even landlords and organizations that were using it to personally, trace people, starts to really get higher. And we see almost 45% of people disagree with landlords of condominiums preventing access to homes based on the use of contact tracing apps. So once again, these results show us that there's a lot of work ahead of us that needs to be done, and that is the work that we want to do at CPS.
So thank you all for your engagement, your attention. This has been fabulous, and thanks to all of our partners, Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst and RBC. And we look forward to hearing from you and working together to build a stronger, safer, and more cybersecure Canada. We hope you all stay well and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thanks, everybody.